May Tynwald was a relatively convivial affair, with health, brownfield sites and cannabis just some of the highlights which we'll squeeze into today's programme. We'll begin, though, with Laurie Hooper's question about Ramsey Cottage Hospital.
Yes. So obviously there have been lots of issues with the Cottage Hospital over the last 12 months or so, and things have been gradually moved around the island. We're now starting to see things come back online, which is really great news, and I just needed something from the Minister on the record that actually starts explaining to the Manx public what's going on up there and what the future is. The Minister has been quite good at keeping me and Dr. Alison quite informed as we've been going along, but actually it's really time that the public need to hear what the future looks like, what the plans are, and how the department's going to engage with the local community as they further develop those plans.
I mean, one of your supplementary questions was a sort of a how on earth did we get into this situation in the first place? I mean, are you convinced by the answers you're getting with that?
It's an interesting one because we've always known that the building is in need of some investment, but actually it's only in the last kind of 6 to 12 months that things have started coming out about how much investment is really needed up there. And that, I think, only happened because when they identified the issue with the infestation and they started going to fix that, obviously as you start picking up rocks, you start figuring out what's underneath. And I think that's what happened. They started to actually see the scale of work that's needed. And I'm really glad that the department and the DOI have kind of acknowledged that they're quite open about the fact that, okay, that facility needs some investment, and they're talking about it in very positive terms, like actually we should be investing, we should be looking at investing in that facility, in upgrading it, replacing it, whatever it may be. But that conversation seems to be quite a positive one, and I think that's why it's really important that they engage with people now as they start to flesh out what the future looks like. Don't leave it too late to start talking to people.
And then we move to a question you had to the Chief Minister, and you wanted to know when the Outstanding Efficiencies Programme quarterly reports will be published, and what are the savings that have been made. What did you make of the answer?
Well, I don't really think I got an answer, actually. The Chief Minister said that he was going to be laying a report or publishing a report at the end of the month, which would be great, to see what their first year looks like. But if that report is anything like the previous ones, it will be big on headlines and low on detail. And when you look through the reports that have been published, they're including things in there as savings and efficiency measures that aren't really savings. So one of the headline numbers is around, we're going to start collecting our debts better. Okay, so people owe you money, you're collecting that money from them, that's great. That's not a saving. You've not somehow managed to reduce the cost of government or increase the amount of income you're getting in, you're just collecting money that's already owed to you. And so I'm I'm more than a little bit nervous about what we're going to get in this report. It's just going to be big flashy headlines, but actually when you scratch the surface, there'll be no substance behind them at all. And this is a programme that the Chief Minister originally said was going to save us 50 million over 5 years. We'd heard today that now it's targeting maybe 10 million over 5 years. And actually, again, I'm still think that number is very, very soft, and to date it's cost £1 million. So the Chief Minister has managed to spend £1 million on an efficiency programme, but was completely unable to give me any examples of cashable savings today. That's really worrying.
Government's got form for this too. There was an efficiencies programme in the Howard Quayle administration which seemed to result in a fair amount of work being done and not very much delivered by way of efficiency savings. Why is this? I mean, is it because actually government has made itself as efficient as it thinks it possibly can, or?
There's a huge difference between efficiencies and cash savings. Can we spend the same money better? Categorically, yes. Can you make things cheaper without affecting services? That's a very different question. And I think the efficiencies programme is trying to answer both those questions at the same time, and they have very different answers sometimes. And that does worry me, because I think if anyone was to look at the government and say, can we be more efficient? Can we do things better? Can we spend the money we are spending in a better way? I think everybody would say yes and can point to some examples of that. But when you ask the question, okay, can I take money out of the system? Can I do the same job cheaper without affecting a frontline service? That's a much more difficult question to answer. And the problem that I think the Chief Minister has got, he's trying to present both of those things as if they are cash savings, both those things as if they are in some way the same, and they're very much not the same. They've got different problems, different solutions. And like you say, we've been here before. This is not the first government efficiency programme that we've seen run on the island, and they never seem to generate those cash out savings. Could that be because we've extracted pretty much as much cash as possible? We've got rid of all the low-hanging fruit. Now what you're looking at is difficult decisions, longer-term decisions perhaps, and those are the kind of decisions that this government especially, finds very, very hard to make.
Do you think that the government is perhaps rather too keen on putting all its chips on the AI square and hoping that something is going to come up with that?
I think they are. I think you'll see that through even the financial forecasts that Treasury produce. A lot of their underlying assumptions are predicated on, economic growth. That will solve all of our problems. AI will solve all of our problems. And actually, they're not going to. They will solve some problems, but they'll probably create new ones that we can't quite anticipate just yet. It's not as simple as saying there's a silver bullet out there, but it does very much feel like the government, rather than actually engaging with some of the core issues and making some of those difficult choices and difficult calls, that's what we're elected to do at the end of the day. It's easier for them to, like you say, put the chips on AI and just try and sell that to people as some sort of magic solution, which, let's face it, we all know it isn't quite that simple.
And then from one set of efficiencies to another, the new energy efficiency scheme, you were asking the DEFRA minister about that. Why do we need a new energy efficiency scheme? What was wrong with the old one?
So the schemes that we currently have are very low impact. They're designed to do things like help people with free light bulbs and a bit more insulation, and that's great. Those kind of things are absolutely essential. But what's really needed is things that will help people use a lot less energy, quite material amounts of energy. And that can only be done by helping people actually invest in their properties. It's much more than just some free light bulbs and a radiator upgrade. It's stuff that actually really is structural change. And that's fine if you can afford it, but a lot of people can't. And so the plan was originally to bring a new scheme through last April. So April 2025 was the plan. That's been delayed repeatedly now. So we're now, in May 26, and we still haven't got the new scheme. They've missed 3 deadlines now on this. And what really worries me is I know the department have been working really hard on this. I think they've had a lot of clarity since day one. And I'm absolutely convinced when the minister stands up and says it's going to happen, that she genuinely believes that. The problem that you've got is Treasury, is the rest of Council of Ministers, and whether any scheme will get through those. And when you're looking at it now, one of the biggest issues people are starting to see, even more so today than 6 months ago, is the fuel prices. Energy prices are going up, fuel prices are going up. It doesn't look like they're going to start coming down anytime soon. And so now you're seeing people being very badly impacted by some of these price increases. And yet, on the other hand, government's idea of support is to tell people they're monitoring the situation. And so now is the time to say, actually, start planning for the winter. If we can put some money on the table to help people with a scheme to help them better insulate their homes, improve their energy efficiency of their properties, actually that will help them have lower energy bills. And now is the time to do that, because you don't want to be thinking about starting that work in the winter when your bills are already going through the roof. We need to start helping people now. So I was quite reassured to hear the minister talking about a scheme coming forward in the near future. I think she said July, but also that there's a funding associated with it, and I think she said it was about £16 million. Now that is a lot of money, and it is being drawn from the climate budget, which again is the right place for it. We're a small island, we're not going to affect climate change by ourselves, but what we can do is invest our climate budgets in things that help people, and I think helping people have lower energy bills, that's a win for everybody.
And it does seem like such an obvious thing that you would wonder why governments 10 years ago hadn't done this. I mean, it is, helping people to stop wasting energy has to be a good thing, surely.
Yeah, it is a no-brainer. It really is. If we can help people have lower energy bills, it means they've got more money to spend on other things, which will help generally drive the economy. And don't forget, most of this money that's being put on the table is going to be spent in people's homes. So that's local businesses with local tradesmen installing things in local houses. It takes a lot of boxes. So the idea that we're still waiting for something like this, we're a year and a bit from when it was supposed to be delivered, it is very surprising. And I don't really know why government hasn't just gone, you know what, this is a good thing. Let's crack on, let's do it. And that very much seems to be DEFRA's position. And so I don't think the issue is within DEFRA. I'm getting the feeling that the issue is when DEFRA then interacts with the Treasury, that's when you have problems. And that's kind of the issue that I'm trying to explore, because that isn't just an issue with Treasury and DEFRA, it's an issue with Treasury more broadly.
And of course, the figures we're talking about here in terms of potential saving to the Manx economy are massive, aren't they? I mean, certainly even when I was still in Council of Ministers, we were talking about 50-60 million pounds a year being spent on fossil fuels to heat our homes. Now, even if you could save half of that, that's 30 million pounds a year that's not being sent off the island to pay for the fossil fuels, and it'll be remaining in the Manx economy.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's an interesting problem because if you look at from a personal perspective, energy costs are one of your biggest outgoings as a homeowner. But also, if you're a business, energy is one of your biggest outgoings. And so, if we do help people spend less, businesses spend less, it means they have more money to reinvest in themselves, reinvest in their businesses, which clearly is good for the economy. I cannot see a downside to doing what's being proposed, to actually incentivising this investment, supporting this investment, and actually spending the money here on Ireland on things that will help everybody. So I don't really understand how it's not something that's been progressed quicker, and the only thing it comes down to is it will be down to, well, how is Treasury and getting involved in some of the decisions around, well, who's eligible and who isn't. And we always get hung up on the detail with some of these schemes, when sometimes the best thing to do is launch the scheme and then make changes to it as you go along, whereas it kind of feels like what they're trying to do is get everything right before they launch the scheme, which then means for a year no one's being helped while they're trying to fill around the edges. It just seems backwards.
And I suppose if a Treasury representative was in on this interview, they would be saying, well, yes, we've heard all this before about give us the money now, and there'll be all kinds of savings which we can't quantify, which will be made at some point in the future. And of course, the Treasury Minister has the difficult job of trying to make sure that the books balance.
Yes, but when it comes to things which are politically in their interest, then we are seeing Treasury hand money over. So the efficiencies programme is a great example of that. They're happy to fund something which has an indeterminate benefit, but this is something that will have an actual, measurable, quantifiable benefit that helps everyone on the island. It'll help average earners, high earners, low earners. It will help everybody. And so it's almost like you should be trying to see what you can do to help. And to my mind, like I said, you start with a scheme that helps most people. That's great. If then you need to tweak it and add it and reduce the scheme or increase the scheme, you do that as you go along, as you learn about the kind of people that are accessing it, the gaps. That's what we tend to do. That's a better way of developing a scheme. Whereas it feels like here, they're not going to launch something until they've managed to iron out all the creases. And the reality is, with any scheme of this kind of scale, you're never going to iron out all the creases before you launch it. There are always going to be problems. There's always going to be people that don't quite qualify who probably should. And if you're going to try and wait to launch it until you've covered absolutely everyone and covered off all the bases, you'll never get anything done.
Ramsey MHK Laurie Hooper there. Julie Edge asked an urgent question about the recent suspension of procedures at Nobles Hospital.
You had an urgent question about the why all adult inpatient and daycare procedures at Nobles Hospital were suspended on the 12th of May. What did you think of the answer that you were given?
Certainly, it doesn't actually tally with some of the previous information about Opal 4s, and then we seem to have this new level of Opal 4.
And Opal 4, what does that refer to?
Well, it refers to the level of pressures in the hospital at that current time. I know we've been in Opal 4 many times, not just 2. Whether that's just 2 this year, maybe, perhaps, but I doubt that. But then we were hearing about, and then this extra pressure, and we moved to cancel elective surgery. Elective surgery, by the time that announcement was made, elective surgery patients would have probably been in the hospital. I've heard that there were some all ready to go into theatre, because theatre starts, if you're going in for the day, or whatever, your theatre prep starting from 8 a.m. It's not like, it's not a 9 to 5 job. Anyway, so that really concerns me, that we sort of had another level that was introduced to cover off why elective was cancelled. And I'm just not confident with the actual management of the numbers of patients going through. So we heard the figures for that particular day on the 12th. However,
and those figures, I mean, there were apparently 60 admissions out of a total hospital population, I think, of 280. And normally the admissions on a daily basis, the Minister said, was about 4%. So that was quite a significant number of potential patients coming in.
Yeah, I'm not sure. The figures that we've been getting recently with regards to inpatient beds is only around about 180. So 60 is a third of that, which is significant. However, somebody in management should have seen that happening as it was happening. As I questioned the Minister, the minute you get 5 patients and you haven't got 5 beds, it's going to be a problem further along the day. And perhaps the significant pressures weren't all within that time frame, because patients would be going into A&E overnight and etc. I just think it's poor bed management and lack of beds, that's not managing the flow out of A&E then effectively. But it did concern me, the number of patients that were suddenly discharged. Were they ready for discharge, or are they going to be readmissions once the situation improves? So I think there's a high rate of readmissions, and it concerns me that we're just not getting this right for the people of the island. We heard about the TT plan. I've asked, where's the plan for Manx residents under Opal 4 or Opal 4 Plus? Is there one? It didn't sound like there was, but the Minister is going away to check on that. But, the pressures of Opal 4 could come in TT week as well. So I'd love to see both plans.
Well, one of the things that you referenced in your questioning was that patients were already effectively admitted, waiting for operations, prepped for the operations almost, and then told actually it's all been cancelled. How could a thing like that happen?
I've never heard of it happening on the island before, I don't believe. I just think that's devastating for the individuals, because it's a significant thing to go through personally, isn't it? You work yourself up to it, and to be in there, and then your bed must have been available for you to be there and admitted. The Minister is going to clarify on that, and I hope to hear the right answers with regards to that. But I just cannot believe that we're seeing and hearing this with such massive investment into Manx care. And, I believe we're going to be voting on another overspend. There is something structurally, strategically very, very wrong in Manx care.
It was quite shocking to hear some of the comments that were made in the debate, the general debate in last month's Tynwald. I think Gary Clewett was raising the prospect that actually our inflation is significantly behind UK inflation, and UK inflation is significantly behind health inflation. So actually all this work that we've done, or that you've done in Tynwald, to get us to a position where we've got all this extra funding for healthcare is going to count for nothing as the years go on.
We're not seeing any results on the ground. The residents of the island, the taxpayers who are paying for this, for the whole of the health system, because it's not just the hospital, and that seems to be where the focus has always been. We've got our community service, our social services, but I really am struggling to understand, with such an increase over a short period of time, 5 years, that we've seen very, very minimal improvements. We've followed a UK health trust, and it's not worked, and we need to admit that it's not worked, and we should have admitted it long ago. As you know, Phil, I didn't vote for Manx Care and the way it's been created, and the governance was wrong from the outset. I said that at the time, and here we are, we're seeing the outcome of that.
And there is an ongoing review at the moment, isn't there, as to the effectiveness of the relationship between the Department of Health and Social Care and Manx Care. Are you not encouraged that at least they are looking into that?
Yes, but it's a bit too late, isn't it? They're still talking about introducing recommendations from Sir Jonathan Michael and transformation. Stop transforming, get the basics right. That's what the Manx population is looking for. We want our basic health services back, effective functioning for everybody, not just being A&E seems to be getting used as a GP practice. Let's get our balance right. I think back in my time working in the health service, a long time ago, we had 56 GPs on our island for a smaller population. Let's get the basics right. Start with the basics and then look, and stop throwing more money at a problem. Fix the structural issues from the outset. And the structural issues are very clear when we've gone from 360 beds at opening down to around about 180. That's something significantly changed, and we need to look at that.
Oncan MHK Julie Edge there, and we'll be hearing directly from the Health Minister on next week's programme. Next, Education Minister Daphne Kane.
You had a motion in relation to student grants, I think it was, on the order paper.
We did indeed. It followed the Public Accounts Committee report where they made many different suggestions on all aspects of improving our offering in terms of student awards. And this was a progress update on what we have done, what is being implemented, and what is still a work in progress.
So what is being done then, I suppose, is the obvious next question. How will students see any difference based on what's being done?
We have prioritised getting the student awards system up and running for those students who'll be applying now for courses starting in September. The new 2025 regulations widen the offering so that those students deciding for distance learning to stay on the island are now able to access tuition fee contributions to the same level as going away. We've also significantly increased the income level for obtaining the maintenance grant up to now over £30,000, and then that is tapered off over up to the 90,000 cut off for child benefit. So there's also very much increased benefits for students with disabilities to access support for equipment, and the aim is to make the further higher education learning accessible much more widely across. But I do acknowledge that in doing so, the concerns raised by members include that squeezed middle again, those people at the top of the £112,000 household income who then with multiple children or with multiple expenses, including mortgages, may actually struggle to support their young people to have the best experience of going away to university. So there are policy considerations for the future, and including, and I have given that undertaking, the department fully intends to return in May in a year's time, 2027, to give a further update, especially on the data collection and the other aspects that we continue to progress in order to make it a really robust system. But I do feel that overall, the Isle of Man has a significantly better support system in place to support students going on to further education, wherever that is or whatever the course is. And I think that is something very precious that I'd like to think the island will retain.
I think it was Michelle Hayward had suggested that maybe you needed to do some work to assess the effectiveness of the grants that you give. So, to actually monitor how the people who'd gone on to be supported to do degrees or whatever tertiary education, how that had actually helped them in their lives in the future. On the face of it, that's not an unreasonable thing to ask.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had all those resources in order to do such detailed follow-up research in terms of students, their experience, the impact perhaps on the economic benefits to them, their career path. I think that level, however impressive it would be, I don't see that is something the department will be pursuing now, but there are other aspects of data collection that we have undertaken to follow up. But the immediate priority has to be ensuring that the systems are there for the students who are currently applying to make sure that they have the full information in terms of the grants, the student award support that they are seeking in order to go away this September. But the department continues, along with many other areas, to continue the policy development on aspects that would support better informed policy decisions in the future in respect of student awards.
That was Garth MHK Daphne Kane. Next, Cabinet Office Minister David Ashford. You
had a motion in relation to one of government's flagship policies. Back in the beginning of this administration, we were told that the focus was on brownfield sites, and it's fair to say that members noted in your report lots of activity, but possibly not as much by way of brownfield sites actually developed.
Well, let's be clear. I mean, the Island Infrastructure Scheme, there's various different proposals that flowed off this. One of those is the Island Infrastructure Scheme. You've got the development going down on Lake Road that's going to deliver 109 residential units. There's over 100 residential units being delivered elsewhere around the island. We've seen development of the old nurses' home as well. So there is movement happening. Has it been slower than potentially some would like, including myself? Absolutely. Because, as you well know, Phil, when you're doing things like this, there is always complications along the way. We always have to make sure the legal frameworks are correct, and we also need to make sure that the support is targeted. For instance, the Island Infrastructure Scheme and the money spent on that, I know there's been certain controversies amongst the public, but what it's done is it's unlocked £80 million worth of private investment, £80 million of private investment that otherwise wouldn't have been flowing into our economy.
One of the other headline figures was Isle of Man government was going to invest 100 million, and it was expecting effectively 900 million to be released from the private sector, so that there would be this big change in infrastructure. Now, to be fair, that island plan talks of a broader period than the electoral cycle, but I think the public, when they were hearing these words at the beginning of the administration, might have expected a little bit more progress by now.
Well, let's be absolutely clear, all that investment hasn't actually flowed as yet. There is still plans for it to do so, but also got to remember the Island Plan was set in 2021 at the start of this administration, and the economic situation has changed radically around the globe since 2021. I think even most economic forecasters, if you turned around to them in 2021 and said what the situation would be now in 2026, they'd have called you mad, potty or deluded. The actual fact is there has been a cost of living crisis that has impacted businesses. It's impacted private investment, and a lot of private investors are wary about where they're investing their money and how much they are taking on. So that has naturally slowed things down as well, because investors will look to one or two key proposals rather than actually looking across the piece and delivering a dozen or so.
And it isn't just the Isle of Man that's struggling to get that kind of investment, is it?
Most definitely not. It's global. If you look at the economic figures globally, investment and private investment, particularly in infrastructure, has been pared back and building. And also, of course, one of the things we've seen from the war in Ukraine, the recovery from COVID and the economic situation is that building products particularly have actually risen higher than the general rate of inflation. So the actual cost of building things has escalated quite considerably over the last 5 years.
And I guess that's why, because you were accused by Mr. Watterson of peddling carrots to encourage development and not wielding sticks to encourage people with the feel of a stick on their back to actually know you can't just leave that site empty. You must do this, because if you don't, we're going to impose this, that, or the other on. I mean, he's right that it is carrot heavy, to use his terminology.
So the carrot and stick approach is absolutely essential to ensuring we get things done. The Speaker is right in the sense that there are incentives there, but also one of the big sticks, as I would call it, is the strategic plan. And that's out for consultation now. So it's another shameless chance for me to plug that and say that people should be engaging in that process, and be they existing members of Tynwald, aspiring members of Tynwald for after September, and also the general public as well. Because my view is the strategic plan is what will drive a lot of this, where we will be able to actually set rules and boundaries around what gets developed where, and ensuring that it's the right type of development, because that's the crucial thing. It's not just about firing things out. It's about getting development that actually benefits the different areas of the society of the island. So for me, the strategic plan is absolutely key to that. And what we can do within that is actually pull different levers. So that is, for me, the big stick. And that's the thing that's in development at the moment.
One of the big concerns across the island, certainly a voiced concern at least, is opposition to offshore and indeed the onshore wind farm. As we're recording this, we're just about to hear a debate on the renewable energy development. Again, the day of recording, this is the Wednesday, we've just heard from the UK that one of their suggested ways of increasing the number of renewable energy projects is to remove the ability of objectors to take decisions to judicial review. Is that something Isle of Man government has considered?
So at the moment, I've got to be absolutely clear, that is not something that is under active consideration for us to change the law. Within the planning policy here on Ireland, we've always thought it very important that things are very carefully weighted, both in terms of the rights of any applicants in relation to planning and also the rights of people to object to planning. And that is always a very fine balance, and it is important, I think, that you don't tip the seesaw one way or the other in favour of one party. That's a very difficult tightrope to walk, but at the moment that is not something that is on the agenda to be looked at.
And I guess in the UK, it's a much bigger area and politicians are much more distant from their constituents. In the Isle of Man, if something like that was suggested, you would hear about it pretty quickly.
I think you most certainly would. I think people would have very clear views on that. And the great thing about the island, of course, is people do engage. People engage in the consultations that go out, and you do get a very good feel for what the local community is feeling. And you mentioned there about closeness to the electorate. You know, we are much closer than politicians are. I've got a friend in the UK who's lived in the same place for 20 years. They've had the same MP for 20 years and they've never seen them once. So we are, or even been able to speak to them in person. So that we've got much closer politics here, and so it's much easier to gauge the overall view of the community, not necessarily those that shout the loudest, but also those who are the silent majority.
So in relation then to the report that you brought to Tynwald, would you say, I don't know if you were giving it marks out of 10, is this a could do better, see me after the lesson, or shows promise but more work required?
I'd say work in progress is the answer, because that's exactly what the report was. We've got to remember what this is. This isn't government coming forward to Tynwald and saying, look at what we've done and these are all the things we're going to do now. This was a report off the back of a motion to Tynwald in November last year, asking for an update on where things stand. So it was a very factual, staid, straight to the point report. It wasn't something that was going to ignite excitement and, reignite the world. It was going to be very much a matter of fact progress update report.
Douglas North MHK David Ashford there. Manx Labour leader Joni Farragut was far from impressed with the Brownfield Sites report.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that this administration is well more than 4 years in, and that update report that we were reading there really did detail very little tangible action. And as I was asking the court, what will our constituents look around them and see? What has visibly changed here? How have things visibly improved? And I think the answer is there's very little to see. There really is exceptionally slow progress in this area, and it's incredibly frustrating given that, as all MHKs will testify to, that was the huge issue on the doorstep in the general election, and it's going to be again in the general election later this year. I think we all know that. People are going to have to justify why we didn't do anything, and it's incredibly frustrating to have all of these work streams and little tangible action to have come out of them. It really is so frustrating. And
this was a flagship policy in the Our Island plan. Why is it? I mean, we can all sort of speculate, I suppose. But do you know why the government seems to be incapable of delivering stuff like this?
I wish I did, because then I could go and try and solve it. But to talk about the motion that I brought, which I mentioned when I was talking there, that was to allow the councils to apply charges to vacant properties and brownfield sites. Now, obviously, that would have been that was a fairly modest practical proposal that I brought through. It certainly wasn't anything radical or extreme by any stretch of the imagination. It was fairly modest. But the Council of Ministers brought an amendment to that, which diluted it to absolute pointlessness. It didn't do anything once the Council of Ministers amendment had been passed, which was really, really disappointing at the time. And I think what the opposition that I faced when I was trying to get Council of Ministers agreement to my motion in advance of the Tynwald sitting was that Treasury said that it's against our tax policy. So that, I think, might be one of the things at the heart of our lack of action. And if it is, I do think that the Council of Ministers should be standing up and saying this and looking at what we actually need to. We need to be honest about what the barriers are here to progress in this area. Otherwise, we're never going to get over those barriers. So I really do want to see the Council of Ministers standing up and saying exactly what it is that has led to this extremely poor progress in this area.
The Speaker, I think, was the only one who actually voted against ultimately, but he said that there are far too many carrots and no sticks to speak of being wielded in relation to this matter. Is he right?
I think he's very much on the ball there. Like I was saying, I think that we can't talk about socialising risk and privatising profit. It's not fair on the taxpayer, and we need to apply that really sharp scrutiny when we're talking about so many levers that use public money, that use taxpayers' money, instead of saying if private developers want to do this and they want to make profit out of it, they have to take the risk. What we're doing is we're saying taxpayers need to take the risk and the private developer can take all the profit. That's really worrying, and it should be really worrying for everybody. And if I definitely agree with the principle of brownfield development, but I'm worried that we're taking a lot of taxpayer risk without the taxpayer payback, where the profit falls to private developers. So yeah, I think he is on the ball there, and there's definitely something that we all need to be keeping our eye on. And I ask those questions of, these are the things that we need to continue to scrutinise as we move forward with this policy of subsidising private developers to build on brownfield sites.
Douglas East MHK Joni Farragher there. Next, Jason Moorhouse.
You had a motion which seemed innocuous enough about energy infrastructure projects shouldn't cause harm to the environment. Why do you think Tynwald members weren't convinced?
It was an interesting motion that brought together several of the key aspects in terms of the need for renewable energy, but also the context in which it's been placed in terms of the cost, the community, and the environment. And it was interesting that many people spoke, but in terms of the arguments, it kind of came down to a small number of issues like you can't do it without having zero impact, which is true, but we've got to think about the great impact that these projects are going to have. And the other point they went for was the one on cost. And I have real genuine concerns that we start off with a price of £23.5 million for the MUA project. That quickly rose to 40, and it stayed there for a considerable amount of time. And it just does not seem right, given how prices have increased so dramatically, that the price is on hold. And I've asked the MUA about this, and their simple answer is, well, we're not in discussions with the manufacturers. But if they're taking this forward without actually having a clear cost envelope in front of them, we could end up getting through planning and realise this is simply far too expensive.
But even if it costs 80 million, 100 million, and you know, when you take into account all the other infrastructure costs, perhaps that's a figure that might be closer to reality. But even if it did cost that, over the lifetime of this wind farm, which could be up to 30 years, maybe more, the savings in terms of not having to buy fossil fuels would by far outweigh the cost, surely.
Well, there are advantages in terms of the shift towards renewables, but the real concern is the level of output from such a small development, and that output is going to go no way towards meeting those costs. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we've got to keep in mind the cost of the project and what the output of these turbines is going to be. And with this underlying issue that the MUA are seeing them as being some of the most efficient turbines in the world. And given the actual location, given the challenges they're going to be faced and the sheer size of these turbines, we can't put that clarity on this. And there are many, many questions being asked in terms of what will the output actually be. And if we're paying a premium figure and only going to get a low-level output, then that's going to be a major issue for the island.
And of course, I'm immediately focusing on Earystone, and I should, of course, declare that I'm an interested party in as much as I live very close to these turbines. But it's not just the Earystone development, there is also the Orsted development. Isle of Man government asked Orsted to come in to prepare this development because Isle of Man government needs the cash.
That is a really difficult and a really frustrating area of our work at the moment, because we're just simply not able to get clear answers. In fact, we can't ask the questions. I put 2 questions in several weeks ago about the actual contract. Nothing to do at all with the planning application, but the questions were ruled out simply because they related to a company with a live planning application. And going forward, that could create tremendous issues, not just in this area, but also in any other area of business. If a business is to put in a planning application for a new headquarters, does that simply rule out Tynwald discussing what that business is doing? And if that is the main business in that sector, does it rule out a sector for 12, 18 months? It's a major, major concern. And it's something we did discuss this morning, but we don't seem to have any give at all in terms of getting that resolved, which is a massive concern.
It sounds like Tynwald has got itself in a bit of a mess with this recent standing orders change, which basically said any body that has a planning application, discussion of that application becomes sub judice. You're extending that a little to say any sort of quick query or questioning of that body, if it's got an existing planning application, becomes impossible. Basically any company anywhere in the Isle of Man that's likely to receive scrutiny, they just need to slap in a planning application for a garden shed.
It does look that simplistic from the outside in terms of the questions I've asked and had to withdraw. It does seem to be a very, very broad overview in terms of what can be done and what can't be done, and that is a concern.
So yeah, that is quite a concern. But going back to your motion, there will be people, particularly on the green agenda side, that will say this was just a kind of a wrecking motion designed to make it impossible for any of the renewable energy developments to proceed.
Oh no, not at all. This was clearly allowing us to consider the wider options. It wasn't at all about pausing. It wasn't about restricting what we were doing. It wasn't about taking options off the table. It was getting us to look at the whole portfolio of options that lay ahead of us that can actually be given an extra push. And then I did bring up things like these solar plans to the NSC, which have progressed really slowly. But, we need to look at this as a complete portfolio of options and not just one major project, which the planners could ultimately say is not appropriate in that location.
So then we move on to another of your motions, and this was a more mundane one, I suppose, in its scale, but a significant issue just the same, and that is the collection of parking fines. It seems that Isle of Man government is able to issue the fines, but not so good at collecting them.
That's it. It's one area I've asked several questions about in the last few months, and there's a real clarity in terms of what should happen, but in reality, as people know, there's no real push to get the money in when people actually owing it for actually parking in the wrong place or doing the wrong thing. And today's motion did kind of move things in the direction of correcting that.
Were you impressed with the amendment that came in, which was basically nothing to see here, just allow the Treasury to get on with it?
It was a fine amendment, because often we get the amendments, as we did with the turbines one, and it just led to some other issues. With this one, it was simply give us extra time and we'll get the work done. And realistically, to get it back in 2 months at the end of an administration is a bit of a big ask. I had wanted to bring it earlier and that didn't happen, but I feel that in 12 months' time, we will actually have something that is and it's well worth waiting for.
And then you had, as is your wont, a series of questions. One of the questions was relating to vehicle discs, which obviously, because it is believed that post office staff would need significant training to be able to process something that they have been processing for many years, this should now all be done at the vehicle testing centre if you want paper copies.
Yeah, this has been a real frustration for many of my constituents who've had to go to Douglas and resolve this issue. In terms of the core question, I wanted to find out how many of these vehicle discs had actually been sold through the post office network last year. And when we heard it was over 40,000, that kind of put this into its context, that the DOI was simply assuming that all of those discs would either be dealt with online or people would go to the test centre and queue up and get one. And there's really been an underestimation of how many people either don't want to do it online or can't do it online.
Were you impressed with the answers that the Minister was given to you? Because at one point I think he just said, sorry, I don't know.
The whole thing was rather surreal in terms of Mr. President's input, in terms of the Minister's answers. The first two weren't really answers at all. He was just finding his feet, which was unusual. And I was also surprised in terms of how few of my colleagues came in and actually saw this as being a real issue that's concerning many of the constituents, many people across the island. And it's, one of those things that appears on Manx Radio frequently about I've had to go up there and I've had to join a queue and I've still not got what I want. So it was slightly disappointing, but I think, it does raise that issue that to do such a key transformation without considering the impact on individual people, it's a learning process that must be considered and must be incorporated going forward.
Arbury, Castletown and Maloo MHK Jason Moorhouse there. Finally, Alex Allinson was looking to move the dial on drug law reform.
It was to drive the progress that we've already made forward into the next administration, to be honest with you. We've been talking about drug law reform for several decades. There was during the debate this constant reference that we can't do anything different to the United Kingdom because we're confined by the various conventions that they've signed up to on our behalf. But actually, when you look around the world, lots of other European countries, American states, have refined their drug laws to really put harm reduction first and either decriminalise or legalise, particularly cannabis for recreational use. So the options are there. And what I was saying is actually we should probably be working with Jersey and Guernsey as a sort of channel islands to have that ability to change our laws that are right for our community rather than what may be right for the UK government at the moment.
I guess what you're saying is that the current system isn't working, really, the enforcement of drug law.
I think it's worse than that. I think the current way that we deal with illegal drugs, which takes back over 50 years to the legislation we passed in 1976, is actually doing harm. It's actually harming people on our island. It's not stopping drugs getting in here. And we can see every month we've got more and more seizures, which is the testament to the abilities of our constabulary. And I certainly don't decry that at all. They're doing the job that they were given. We're seeing the prison population increasing to the point now where we may need an extra wing to the Derby prison. But actually we're not reducing the harm to people, and we're criminalising people for possession, personal use, or low-level dealing, often to fund their own personal use. So we need to sort of get off the roundabout a little bit and see what's the best way of actually dealing with the drug problem, which isn't going away. The war on drugs isn't working. And all the evidence we've got points towards treating this in a more adult manner and actually looking at having a created legislative safe marketplace, particularly for recreational cannabis, which gets rid of the criminality and actually helps those people get a product that they're taking anyway that's far safer and stops them getting involved in a criminal network and stops them getting penalised and criminalised themselves through arrest and prosecution.
You would, though, have noted the powerful comments from Kirsty Morford, MLC, who has worked with the drug and alcohol team and warned about the dangers of cannabis.
There are certain dangers there. I mean, cannabis has been around for tens of thousands of years, and it actually has been used across the British Isles for centuries. The drug laws we have at the moment, the prohibition on drugs, is a relatively new thing from the 1970s. Before that, people were using cannabis, people were using other drugs, and the state didn't get that much involved in it, so the criminality wasn't involved. But the harder you crack down on drugs, the more those drugs change and get stronger, and the more criminals get more sophisticated and often more violent and more devious.
I'm Phil Gaughan. Guramaus and Geistach Rom. Thanks for listening.